Why don't I read a couple of entries from his time in Toronto, because it'll give you a sense of what he felt before he came up in the spring, and then I'll read a couple of entries during his time in the park. So this one is January 11th, 1917. It's called Green Eye Monster. You'll find out what the Green Eye Monster is in a minute. Slacker, beware of the Green Eye Monster. Conscription. That's what was marked in chalk on the wall beside the employment office on Bay Street. There were 3 soldiers standing in front with grins on their faces that were anything but friendly. I saw these 3 as I was going down to the shops to buy some groceries. I've been noticing there's more and more soldiers on the streets these days. Not the ones going to war, but the ones that have returned. They seem to have nothing to do but make trouble for others. Hey, slacker! I knew that shout was directed to me, but I kept on going. Although I was a target, being a single male, the targets that had the greater attention of the soldiers were the Greeks. Most of the shops and cafes downtown are owned by Greek immigrant families. The Greek sons wait on the tables, and the Greek daughters work in the back kitchens. There was a rising resentment against the Greeks because Greece was neither considered an ally or an enemy in the war. Canadians went off to fight, but they stayed home. Most of the Greeks had come here before the war, and they were well established. In contrast, the Macedonians more recently had come as refugees from fighting against or with the Greeks. I could never keep straight who was fighting who over there. The Macedonians stayed within their own neighborhoods on the Danforth on the other side of the Don. But the Greeks, having most of the shops and cafes by Yonge and Wellesley, were mixed in with the business district, and it was a sore reminder to the many families of English descent who had sent their sons over to seas to fight, to see the Greek sons working at home. It was often said, "We Anglos are sending our sons to fight overseas, and it's the Greeks making the money by taking their jobs." For the Germans, it was more straightforward. They were enemies. As a result of the Enemy Alien Registration Act, the men of German descent, Huns, as everybody called them in Toronto, were rounded up and sent to internment camps. The same happened in the town of Berlin, now named after Lord Kitchener. When I was fire ranging last summer, I saw the camps on the eastern side of the park, and close to Pembroke too. But since the Enemy Act didn't apply to the Greeks, they stayed. They took the jobs in the factories, kept serving in the shops and cafes. When the veterans came back from the war, they found no jobs, all filled by women and Greeks. There was nothing left for them. Though they fought for the country, many of the soldiers felt that the Dominion had no longer use for them. Hardly a week would go by without someone jumping to their death out of a window or in front of a train. When the recruiting efforts turned in poor numbers, the talk of conscription started in earnest. The veterans began to call it the revenge of the Green Eye Monster. The Green Eye Monster would be rounding up the slackers to fight overseas. That was the intent of the chalk missive I saw scratched on the wall today. I managed to get my groceries. When I got back, I checked the directory in the studio to see if I had any mail. There wasn't any mail, but there were some old issues of the newspapers and magazines set aside for me. Bill Beattie, when finished with them, leaves them for me to read. And when I'm done with them, the newspapers, I cut the pages into quarters and put them in the privy for one final use. I had tea, I looked at my canvases, I looked at the finished ones and the blank ones ready to go. I felt pretty good about my progress. I'll start on my next canvas tomorrow, and I'll prime it with a light brown. I like my canvases to have the same feel and texture of the birch panels that I get from the mill in South River. Umber in linseed does the job well for light brown. So that's one. That gives you a feel for what it was like in Toronto in 1917. A lot of racial tensions with the Greeks and the Macedonians. Interesting, if you ever have read the story In the Skin of the Lion by Michael Ondaatje, I don't know if you ever remember that scene with the nuns walking along the Bloor Street Viaduct that they get saved by a worker. That's the exact same time period as well. The Bloor Street Viaduct was actually being built at that time. So that gives you a flavor of what he was going through.